Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this online session in the Israel United Synagogue Adult Education Program, in which Rabbi Geoffrey Shisler will be discussing composing synagogue music for the 21st century, and there will be a heavy emphasis on his own two collections of compositions for use in synagogues, Shir Shir Chadash, and you will have the opportunity of hearing some of these works performed by well-known Chazanim. Let's get started with his Yishtabach, sung by the children from Sinai School. Before we get down to the actual background of your compositions, I think that people would like to know about your background. So where were you born and brought up?
Well, I was born in Brighton, and I only lived there actually until the age of 10, but I was born there, went to Middle Street Shul. Anybody's ever been there, they will know it's one of the most beautiful shul buildings in this country. It's a Victorian building. I don't know if it's true, but I remember being told it was the first public building in this country to be lit by electricity. Anyway, I was brought up there as a child.
So you attended Middle Street in those early days. And do you remember who the Chazan was?
Certainly do. He was Beryl Bronstein,
Oh.
Shalom. Chazan Bronstein, actually on one of the, I think maybe the last program that I did, we played a piece from him. He was a really very good Chazan indeed. I was very, very small, but I remember him well, and I already had quite an interest in singing and in shul music in any case. In fact, any of you who've ever heard me daven on a Shabbat morning will know that when I start Ein Kamocha, I sing it like this. Ein Kamocha v'Elokim Hashem. I never heard anybody else do it like that. But I do that because that's how I remember Beryl Bronstein used to do it. So it's kind of my little tribute to him in his memory.
Do you have any other recollections from those early days?
Well, one particular recollection I have is I'm guessing, as I say, we left when I was 10, so I might have been 10 already, but I was certainly 9 or 10. And Louis Shute, who was in his day a really very, very well-known choir master. He'd actually been the choir master in the great synagogue. He came down to Brighton to conduct the choir for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And of course, even as a little kiddie, I was in that choir. So I remember that very well. I can remember getting told off in shul for making a noise, but I remember the shul with much, much fondness.
And how and when did you develop an interest in Jewish and cantorial music?
Well, I've always been interested in performing, singing, always loved singing. And my interest in Chazanut must have started really quite young. In truth, I wanted to go on the stage, if I'm honest. And unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, I got religion And I soon realized that you can't be an observant Jew and be on the stage. So there is a sense, I suppose, in which being a chazan became a substitute for my performing on the stage.
There's a difference between an interest in Jewish and Cantora music and wishing to become a chazan.
Well, there is, except that I could sing. And when we came to London, we went to Woodside Park Shul, and I always listened to the nusach of the chazan in that shul. And I had, in those days, I suppose like most youngsters, my memory was fantastic, and I absorbed nusach very, very quickly. So I knew actually quite early on, when I passed my 11 plus, I was down to go to a local grammar school, and my father, alav shalom, organized me to go to Hasmonean, which I was very happy about. And so I went there and developed my interest in Chazanut at the same time as I was being taught, my Jewish studies lessons and so on.
Let's go on to a second piece, Eitz Chaim He with Lionel Rosenfeld.
Eitz Chaim
So where did you study Chazanot and Nusach HaTfilah?
A Jewish college under the Reverend Leo Brill. Zichrono livracha. I was very, very young when I went to Jewish college. I was only 16. I just done my O-levels. I was determined that I was going to be a chazan, and that's all I was going to do. So I really, I suppose, some wangled my way into college. They weren't very keen to. Reverend Brill really wasn't particularly keen to take me. He said I was much too young. But the people who ran the college persuaded him, and I joined the Chazanut class, and I stayed there for 3 years. And I have to say that she was an extraordinary teacher. I knew everything about Chazanut when I was 16. I was probably the biggest expert on Chazanut in the country, if not in the world, when I was 16. And so when I went to Jews College, I didn't think that the Reverend Bill had much to teach me. Of course, as the years went by, I realized that the man was quite extraordinary. He was a wonderful teacher. His knowledge of interpretation was just superb. And he inculcated into me things that I hope have remained with me throughout my life.
Roughly how many people were on those courses in those days?
Oh, yes, that's rather sad. In those days, there were 13 or 14 boys doing the full-time Chazanut course. And I have many, many fond memories of those days at Jews College. Any Chazan who came to this country would visit Brill. People came from abroad, they would come to college to visit Reverend Brill. And of course, you would always say to them, come on, you've got to sing something. I remember one particular occasion when Fischel Rosenberg, who had been the Chazan in the new synagogue in Egerton Road, Stamford Hill, where many years later, that was my first full-time post, when the shul wasn't what it had been in Fischel Rosenberg's time. But I remember he came over, he davened a Shabbat in Hampstead Garden suburb. In those days, I lived in North Finchley, so although it was a bit of a schlep, I walked over to hear him daven on Shabbat morning. Absolutely off this planet he was. Then on the following day, on Sunday, he gave a concert at a friend's house, which was magnificent, and Reverend Bill prayed for him. Then on Monday morning, he popped into the college to see Reverend Bill, perhaps to say cheerio, and Reverend Bill insisted, oh, you must sing for my boys. And I remember him saying, oh, we must have been absolutely worn out, Nebuch. And Reverend Brill insisted, and I remember that Fischel Rosenberg picked up a siddur from off the piano, and he simply went like that, just opened it up, and the first page, I sing a Tochonain, and he sang in a Tochonain. Reverend Brill had the most extraordinary ability as an accompanist. If truth were known, he wasn't the best pianist, but he was an amazing, outstanding accompanist. You almost felt that Reverend Brill knew what you were going to sing before you got to it. So we had this situation of Chazan Rosenberg, I wouldn't swear to it, but I'm fairly sure, improvising an Atochonain, Chazan Brill playing it with him. If only in those days we'd had a tape recorder or a mobile phone to record it on, it would have been something I would love to have been able to listen to today. Yeah. I had 3 wonderful years with Reverend Bill, and I learned more from him than I could ever repay.
And what qualification did you get at the end of it?
The Chazanut diploma. I should tell you, every 2 years they gave out an award for, they called it the Samuel Ullman Award in Chazanut, and I won it twice. I won it the first year that I was there and the third year that I was there.
And what did you do after you left Jews College?
After I left Jews College, my father, very, very rightly said to me, you're 19 years old. Nobody's going to employ you as a full-time Chazan. And a bit against my will, he persuaded me to go to Trent Park College of Education to train just as a secular teacher. Of course, it did help a bit that the girl who I was to marry, Anne, was there as well. She'd been there a year before me. And so we could see one another every day for her last 2 years and my first 2 years at college. And I qualified as a certificated teacher.
And what were you teaching? Generalist or a specialist?
Well, my main subject, I laugh when I think of it now, my main subject was maths. I mean, the amount of maths I know today, you could put on the back of a postage stamp. But that was my main field of study. I did a junior secondary course, so I actually qualified to teach in primary schools and in secondary schools.
And I think that throughout your career, you've always been a passionate educator, and we'll come on to some of that later. Returning to the Kantorah scene, what was your first job for the Yamim Noraim, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur?
Well, I was 16 years old, and I applied for a job in Whitefield in Manchester. Now, that was the original Whitefield Synagogue, not the beautiful building they have today. This was, I remember well, it was a converted school, and it was a very old school where you had each classroom had its own ceiling over it, not ceiling, well, but a roof. And so I presume it had a roof and then a wall and another roof and a wall. And they'd just taken away the whole ceiling. So you had all these roofs to sing into. And I stood on the bimmer at the age of 16. I'll never forget, after the first day of Rosh Hashanah, I sang my heart out. And I got to the end of the day and I thought to myself, I've got to sing again tomorrow. And I stood on the bimmer the second day. I do not know how I got through that davening. The Ribono Shel Olam really put his arm around me and helped me through it. I really wore myself out. And foolishly, I did the same thing till Nidra night, where I gave my all and then realized on the following day I had to daven Musaf and then Ne'ilah. But it was a good education. And I was only 16 and I got paid £90. That was a lot of money.
Yeah. Did you have any reaction at that time from the congregation?
Oh, it's such a long time ago, I can't remember. Okay. I doubt if the people still talking about it, though.
Let's listen now to Shinizker with Rabbi David Katanka.
Can I just say, that piece, we had, when I was in Bournemouth, we once had a fantastic Shabbat when Naftali Hershtik and his choir came down to spend the Shabbat with us. And we had a concert in the evening, and I sang that with Naftali, with him harmonizing. It's a very, very easy piece to harmonize, in fact. And he harmonized it, and I wish I'd recorded it, because I thought it was rather nice.
So what was your first regular job? And if it's not the same, your first full-time job?
Not the same. My first regular job was in Finchley Central Federation. That's Anne's family shul. It was. That was Finchley Central, and we lived in North Finchley. So it was a little bit of a walk, but I was young, and I was appointed there when I think I must have been about 19. Just obviously for Shabbat and Yom Tov, and that was my first job. Then we got married in 1969 and moved to Ilford, where I took a part-time job in the Ilford Federation Shul, and I was a full-time teacher in a local primary school. We stayed there just for 1 year, and my first full-time post was in the new synagogue, Egerton Road, where we went in 1970, and we stayed there for 2.5 years.
Your predecessors there were the illustrious Jacob Goldstein and Ephraim Rosenberg. So tell us about how you became the cousin there at such a young age, and how much the post prepared you for your later career.
I was so lucky to have been there, because first of all, it had a choir that sang every single Shabbat and Yom Tov, and also sang on Yom Tov evenings. It was a very good choir. The only issues I had with that choir is they were never prepared to learn anything new. They had quite a big repertoire. Most of the stuff I didn't know when I first got there, but they had a big repertoire. The Alman, Sfirat Omer, Emet ve'emunah, Bigun Etanet Tokef, was all this kind of stuff, and I just had to learn it. And as I say, I was able to absorb it very quickly. It was a very good choir, and it was a chazan shul. Egerton Road was meant for a chazan. It wasn't a rabbi shul. The biggest shikoach I got there, almost, was one Shabbat Chanukah when we finished about 1 o'clock. The service went on, and they absolutely loved it. I remember that Shvi Shel Pesach, we always did a big Sfirat Omer service, and lots of locals, Hasidim particularly, would come for that service, as they did for Slichot. And the shul wasn't packed, but it was a very big crowd for Slichot and for Sfirat Omer from most people who lived in the area. As I say, lots of people who weren't members used to come for those, specifically for those services. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to be for a first job. And I missed it very much in many respects when we left there.
Where did you go on to? Was it Kenton?
Yes, it was.
Yes.
That was my
where you spent 20 years of your career there as a cousin and minister at Kenton. Must have been very different from Stamford Hill, and I know that you made many good friends while you were there.
Kenton was a totally different environment. Kenton was not a place that looked for a chazan. There were certain people in Kenton who were positively opposed to having a chazan. They just wanted somebody to daven, and that was it. And we started a choir. I remember Gerald Neplolova Shalom was the first choir master, then Stephen Fagan, he took over, both very, very successfully. We had a really outstanding choir. The choir in Egerton Road was a professional choir. Don't know how much they got paid, but they all got paid. Kenton, of course, was just a local amateur choir. But once they got going in Kenton, they were certainly as good as the guys who'd been singing for years in Egerton Road.
We're now going to hear Hallel with Steve Robbins.
Israel,
Geoffrey, I can't see where you are. What about that? Really is nice, isn't it? You sort of feel really very uplifted. Okay, and finally, there's Hallelujah. Actually, I'm going to sing it second time. You're going to join me. All right? It's very short. You'll get it quickly. Okay. Hallelujah, Hashem, Gogoyim, Shabbat, Kol Hamid, King Allah, Aleinu Chasron, Ve'emet Hashem le'olam.
Now, this period in Kenton, I think you're also teaching Jewish studies at all levels, and for 11 years you taught Cantora music and Nusach Hatfilah at Jews College. How did that come about, and who were some of your leading pupils?
That's a leading question. I have to be very careful how I answer that one, especially because I think there's some people on this list who are watching now who I think I must have taught. Well, I know I taught. I came to teach at Jews College by a strange way, really. I do not know the background to this at all, but they had set up a course for laymen that Reverend Brill was going to teach. This was a long time after I'd left college, of course. I was already the cousin for quite a number of years in Kenton. And for a reason that I have absolutely no knowledge of, literally at the last minute, Reverend Brill decided he didn't want to do it. And I got a call from the college principal, Rabbi Dr. Nachum Rabinovich, to ask me if I would take the course. And very quickly I had to prepare myself, and that's how I came to teach at Jews College. As I say, stayed there for about 11 years till I went to Bournemouth. I've taught, I'm not going to mention names, but other than you know I taught you.
Indeed.
There are other people who are watching now. I had the pleasure to teach. I taught many people over those 11 years. I guess I must have been over 100 people. In fact, just this week I met somebody who said to me, "Oh, I was in your class at Jews College," and I'm afraid I didn't honestly remember him, but and I've also taught private pupils of course. Right.
We've heard 4 of your compositions so far. What was your first composition, and why did you write it?
Well, the very first thing I wrote was an inconsequential Va'ani Tefilati. And I wrote it because I didn't know what they sang in Kenton. And I wrote Va'ani Tefilati, which quite a lot of people know. And in fact, we're helping out now in Radlett, and sang that on first day Shavuot. And to my delight and surprise, quite a lot of people joined in. So they obviously you sing it there and don't even know that I wrote it. But I wrote it out of necessity, and I remember very well the kind of trepidation with which I sang it for the first time I'd ever sung in public, something that I'd written myself.
And was it these Nusach Hatfilah course that inspired you to think about writing your own compositions? And what is your style of composing?
I am very, very, very keen on melody. I like very much, if it's possible, that people can relate to something very quickly. And if you have a strong melody line, people can relate to it, even if they don't know it. And if it's a strong melody line, after 2 or 3 times of hearing it, they can join in and learn it quickly. That's what I strive for. I always try to write something.
Let's now hear Shema with Gideon Zellermeyer.
Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad
The recordings we've heard so far, I think, were actually recorded at the time you brought out your first publication. So, can you give us the name of your 2 publications and when they were published?
Oh, that's a good question. First, they're both called Tenu Kavod La Torah. No, they're not. That's a different book I wrote.
Yeah.
They're called Shiru Lo Shir Chadash. Sing to him a new song. That was published in Montreal. I can't remember when. But when I came, then I wrote a second book, which I published myself here, Volume 2. The first one was published because Stephen Glass and Ari Subar was a cousin in Montreal, and he was here for a Cantors Convention, and there was a session on my compositions one session. Stephen Glass was playing the piano, and he knew quite a lot of my stuff already. And apparently he said, Harry Subar and he looked at one another and said, why don't we publish this stuff? So they took it away to Montreal, and it's got published there. That's why, incidentally, you've just heard Gideon Zellermeyer, cousin in Shah Shemaim in Montreal, who actually recorded every single piece in book one. And it comes with the book. I haven't got any more copies, but if you can get hold of a copy of it, if you wanted it, every single piece in the book is recorded by Gideon.
Now, you also wrote music for schools and for children's services. What were they?
I did. Well, the one was the first piece you heard, the Yishtabach, the first piece we played this evening. It's not very well organised, but it's a group of children singing. And we had a shaliach in Kenton, Amos Safrai, who asked me if I could compose something for Yishtabach. He wanted a Yishtabach. And I worked very hard and eventually was able to come up with this one, which he liked and which the children, I know for a fact they still sing. And in fact, I know there are a number of schools where they use it now. And I wrote a number of pieces. As a result, he asked me for other things for school assemblies.
Now, your next career move was to Bournemouth Hebrew congregation, where you're both the rabbi and the chazan. When did you start your Samicha course? And was it because you could see the writing on the wall for the employment of cantors in the United Synagogue?
That's a very loaded question, Spencer. I think in a sense, the answer is yes. I believe there's not one single full-time cantor in the United Synagogue left.
Correct.
Even Stephen Lee's in Central is now only part-time.
Yeah.
He was the last one. The United Synagogue has no interest in full-time chazanim, sadly. And I knew that was going to happen. It was obvious. One could see clearly what was going to happen. And I knew my future couldn't be if I stayed as a chazan. I indicated to you before that there were people in Kenton who didn't really want a chazan altogether. And even when we left, although on personal level, we got on very, very well with people. Many people in the congregation, we became very friendly. We came to love lots of them. But there was, even amongst the people that we became close to, there were some who didn't particularly want a chazan. It wasn't personal.
Yeah.
They just didn't want a chazan. So on the Yamim Nora'im, for example, when we had more than one service taking place, there were people who would deliberately go somewhere where I was not singing with the choir. They'd go into one of the other services.
I remember you had very successful learning sessions after the Shabbos morning service and Kiddush. Tell us about why you established this form of learning. Would you like to see this format used as a blueprint for other communities?
Well, I can only tell you, as those people who were in Kenton in those days will tell you, it was highly successful. Yeah. We had at one time 3 different sessions taking place. It was just, I used to do, much of what I did was midrash, or, it was light. It wasn't heavy learning, but it was usually on the Sedra. I used to do one, the rabbi of the shul did one, and Rabbi Dr. Leper, Zichron Livracha, did a third one. And I reckon at least 80% of the congregation would stay behind. They were great. I enjoyed them enormously. And from what I can tell, well, people must enjoy them or they wouldn't have stayed. Yeah. And I think I introduced it into Bournemouth. I don't know if you remember. Yeah. We used to have a learning session after davening.
Yeah. I think I'm right in saying that at Bournemouth, this was your first ministerial post where you didn't have to act in tandem with an established rabbi. Was it difficult to adapt to being a kolbo?
Yes, in a sense it was. I don't think people realise that the buck stops on the rabbi's desk, and no matter how good the chazan is or how well involved he is with the congregation, he still has a rabbi above him. When I came to Bournemouth, I didn't have anybody above me. The only people who thought they were above me were the wardens, who soon found out they weren't. But that's a different discussion. Let's not go down that
No, we won't. Right.
route.
Let's listen to the chauffeur Godot with Robert Brody.
Oh, was auf Argadoi
Your final ministerial post was in London at the New West End Synagogue, which has an English Heritage Grade 1 listing. What challenges did being the rabbi in a central London synagogue bring?
That's an interesting question. We had quite a number of visitors, not as many as we would have liked. People who go to the West End, visitors who come to the West End tend to go rather to Marble Arch. The travel agents in Israel, particularly, and in America, have only ever heard of Marble Arch Synagogue. They've never heard of the New West End. And on more than one occasion, we had people who were they came one Shabbat. They came one Shabbat and said the previous week they'd been in Marble Arch, where they were staying right near the New West End. They didn't realise they were so close to St. Petersburg Place. And also the congregation is very, very small there. There's very, very, very few people, members of that synagogue, who live anywhere near it. So the greatest challenges are not to do with ministering really, or being certainly not being a chazan. The greatest challenges were trying to build a congregation, trying to build a community, which Anne particularly worked very hard at.
Now, was at that time that you served as an inspector for Pikuach, the organisation that inspects the Jewish education in Jewish schools, and you were also a judge for the National Teaching Awards for a number of years.
I was.
How did you come to be doing that?
I was also a magistrate.
Yes, I know that. Yeah.
I was invited to be when they started the National Teaching Awards. I'm guessing it may have been through the Board of Deputies, who they'd been approached by the organisation, Ministry of Education, I suppose. I'm not sure who does it. If there's somebody in the south east of the country, wanted somebody a Jew on the panel, and I was approached, and I saw some amazing teaching. I travelled all around the whole of the southeast of the country, visiting people. Saw some amazing teachers, people, special needs teachers, but also ordinary teachers who were deemed by their peers to be outstanding proponents of their craft. That I enjoyed very, very much. I became a magistrate. Always wanted to be a magistrate. I spent a lot of my time in prison. Of course, visiting. I was a prison chaplain from my Kempton days. Used to travel up to Brendan, Underwood and Spring Hill. When we moved to Bournemouth, I went to Parkhurst, on the Isle of Wight, Parkhurst, Camp Hill and Albany. So I spent a lot of time in prison. They wouldn't allow me to be a magistrate in Bournemouth. The members of the congregation, the executive in their infinite wisdom, decided that it might promote anti-Semitism in the town, even though one of the leading lights of the congregation was also a district judge, and certainly very well known to be Jewish. He didn't apparently provoke any anti-Semitism in the town, but they were worried that having their rabbi on as a magistrate might have done. So the shul turned me down, wouldn't allow me to apply. But when I came to the West End, they were rather more enlightened, and I became a magistrate. In fact, the United Synagogue was very pleased. I remember receiving a very, very nice letter from the CEO saying how much they appreciated it, because it is very important for Jewish people to play a role in the wider society.
We're now going to hear Rachmana with Moshe Shulchan, and I think you've got a story which you can either tell before or after we play it.
Let's hear it first. So this is from Slichot.
Oh
having heard your compositions this evening, can I ask you where you think cantorial music is heading in the future and what we need to do to preserve it?
They're two very, very different questions, Spencer. I'm not optimistic whatsoever. I think in this country, apart from very, very few exceptions, even in the provinces, you've got only a handful of full-time chazanim now. There's only one or two places in Manchester where you've got the Yehuda Marks, for example. You've got the Chait boys. There's hardly any full-time chazanim left, sadly. In London, there is, as I say, nobody. And I think most people, the whole approach to chazanut is completely different. I'm not going to say it's worse. I think that would be not useful, but it's not the chazanut that we knew from many years ago. It's not the chazanut that I love as chazanut. It's people, today, most of it is adapting other melodies, adapting well-known melodies. And you certainly don't need to be a chazan to do that. And I'm sorry to say that I still have countless melodies inside me. I'm not going to bother to write them down. It's absolutely pointless publishing shoe music today because nobody ever sings anything new. They only sing adaptations. You have a handful of chazanim trying to sing a piece of chazanut from time to time, which is wonderful. And the rest of them, the Bali Tefillah, who happen to have nice voices and can read a bit of Hebrew, not all of them, but most of them. And they just adapt Israeli songs, they adapt Yiddish songs, and worst of all, they adapt songs from the West End musicals. And people laugh. It's not davening, it's laughing and, making choizik of the davening in my book. And I'm not optimistic, I'm afraid. I think chazanut is going to end up purely on the platform stage. On the platform, that's all. People will go and hear chazanut. They will hear people, and there are some wonderful chazanim today. There are some people coming out from Israel, and curiously, quite a number of them Hasidim, who are wonderful. They're absolutely wonderful chazanim. But they don't sing in shuls on every single Shabbat. One or two of them, even people like Helfgott, I'm told, only davens like once a month. People, it's changed completely. And what's worse, much worse, is we're losing the nusach, which is much, much worse. You go to shuls and you hear people davening. Okay, they have a pleasant voice, they can read Yivra, but they have no idea what the right melody should be. The plain nusach, let alone chazanut. First thing that comes into their mind, they sing. Any old rubbish that comes out, and people don't care. The problem today is that, I've often said this, in years gone by, if a person would go and stand on the bimah and he didn't know his nusach, the gubber would throw him out. The warden would stop him from singing. If the warden didn't stop him, the unlikely event, the rabbi would stop him. We now have generations where the wardens don't know and don't care about nusach, and the young rabbonim don't know and don't care about nusach. So what chance have we got? There is only one solution, and that is education. We have to teach as many, many, many people as possible as we can what the correct nusach should be. You might recall that when I was teaching you at Jews College, I always said to people who started a course with me, you'll regret doing this course because you will learn the correct way to do things, and then you will go into your shul and you will hear the people doing it the wrong way and you'll get upset. And I've been told by students I was right. I was quite right. People were up. They do get upset when they know what it should be. They know what our traditions are, and they don't hear it. That's my worry. And I discussed with the principal of London School for Jewish Studies on more than one occasion. I've suggested to him that they should start a course there, a Nusach Tefillah, and he's simply not interested. Doesn't want to know. So where do you go? I'm not optimistic about the future of Chazanot or Nusach. I hope I'm wrong. I hope and pray I'm wrong, but I'm not optimistic.
Let's go on to Lekel Baruch with the children from Sinai School. You've mentioned that you're a magistrate outside the ministry, but I understand you're also an associate member of the Inner Magic Circle with Silver Star, the only rabbi in the society.
I am
I'm
indeed.
interested in that.
Oh, I've always loved magic, always been interested in magic since I was very, very young, like most kids. In fact, when we were in Kenton, I joined a society called the Zodiac Magical Society. Used to go there every week, it was great. And then when we moved eventually, actually in Bournemouth, I joined the Wessex Magic Society. And then when we came to London, I joined the Magic Circle. And then eventually became an associate of the Inner Magic Circle.
And you still continue with your magic, yeah?
Well, I don't do as much now as I used to, but I still dabble.
The time presses, so let's listen to Birchat HaChodesh with you singing at this time. I'd like to thank you for your presentation of your own compositions this evening and for your views about Jewish synagogue music for the future. On a personal note, it's given me great pleasure to be introducing this session since our paths have crossed repeatedly over a very long period. We celebrate the same wedding anniversary, having married on the same day of the same year. You were the full-time cousin in the neighbouring community of Kenton when I was the financial representative and then warden in Wembley. You were my teacher and mentor when I attended your Nusach HaTefillah courses at the then Jews College. You were my rabbi in Bournemouth Hebrew congregation when I lived there, and you followed me to Edgware within the last decade. And we now spend Pesach with our spouses together abroad each year. So it's been a great pleasure introducing this session, and we're going to wind up with Havu by the ensemble.
Yes.